Ready there, boss? Okay. Welcome to Monmouth Battlefield. My name is Dr. David Martin. I am president of the Friends of the Battlefield. And where'd the mic go?
Oh, I put it awwe because it was making such a horrendous sound.
Rude noises. Okay. So good. I can wander as I want. We are a volunteer support group for the park. We co-sponsor the reenactment, which this year is at the last weekend in June. This will be a small to medium-sized reenactment, which I actually like better. A, it's less trouble to prepare, but B, you can actually get in among the camps more and see more what's going on. We are planning a huge reenactment for the 250th anniversary of the battle in 2028, and we're still trying to figure out all the logistics of that. And the dates in our newsletter, which is available online at friendsofmonmouth.org or in front of the gift shop. Okay, Molly break. Okay, Molly dance. Molly dance. Good girl. Molly dance. Good girl. Okay, that'll keep her busy for 2 minutes. We also give free tours of the battlefield the first Sunday every month at 1:30. And I've started a lecture series up last year that every month, the second Sunday at 2 o'clock, I'll give a lecture related to the battle. And that list is posted on our website or in the newsletter. And next month, I think I'm doing George Washington as a general, as a field commander, and the June talk will be on the Court Martial General Charles Lee. So some of them get more specific than others, and I appreciate there's a number of, call it old timers, not age-wise, but people who've been to these talks before, but I'm glad to see many new faces here. That's cool. The topic today is one of my favorite ones to give. It has very little to do with Monmouth, even New Jersey, but I love giving this talk, and I sneaked it in this year because I want to vary my talk cycle a little bit. About half of them repeat from the previous year or with alterations, and this one I haven't given for a few years. So my topic is Abraham Lincoln's sense of humor. It's kind of follow-up to the talk I gave in February on George Washington's sense of humor, which was a little hard to delve into. Lincoln obviously is not. He's what we would call a humorist. I think he would have been a great host for The Tonight Show back with Johnny Carson. It's just his intellect, his personality, but he did use humor and I'm just previewing what's going on, to deflate some issues or to help explain some issues more. And there's some jokes that are just plain good. So I'm pleased to share them with you. What I want to talk about the first few minutes is what he had to do with New Jersey. The Lincoln family came from England and settled originally in Massachusetts. And by the early 1700s, they were here in Monmouth County. His great-grandfather, John Lincoln, was born in Freehold, then called Monmouth Courthouse, in 1711. So the Lincoln family lived in this area in the 1700s. And some of the other side of the family was here even longer. What is cool is that he had a great aunt who died in near Freehold, and she's buried in a little cemetery over near Allentown. And you go up there, they don't even spell Lincoln right. I think it leaves the second L out. So his family passed through New Jersey, and one of his ancestors or relatives actually died here and is buried, 5 miles from here or so. What's interesting is when Lincoln came through New Jersey in 1861 on his way to be inaugurated, he gave a speech in Trenton, which was important because of the coming course of the war. And he mentioned the patriotism of New Jersey in the Revolution, but did not mention that his family had lived here once. I come to think that he didn't know that his family lived here once, because they then moved to Kentucky, where he was born, then he lived in Indiana and ended up in Illinois, as a lot of people in that generation did. So that's his direct connection with the state, is that, again, his family, his great-grandfather was born in Freehold, which is pretty cool. He never spent a night in New Jersey, dead or alive. Okay, he was always, like some people, passing through from New York to Philadelphia. And I mentioned that in 1861, he gave an important speech in Trenton at the State House on the way to be inaugurated, but he didn't stay overnight. He stayed for lunch and hopped on the train and went down to Philadelphia. When his funeral train got put together and covered the country, it didn't even stop overnight in New Jersey. Again, it passed from Philadelphia to New York. However, his wife, Mary Todd, did enjoy Jersey because she and her children liked to go down to the shore. And Lincoln wasn't a shore guy. So, President has some obscure ancestry here that he was. I'm a teacher, so I repeat things. So, please allow me that. Also, I have a habit that I keep near my desk, things to throw. Now, I teach in a private school, and I can get away with throwing things at the kids as long as I don't hurt them too bad. One of the best things I can do first couple days of school, take one of these guys and fling it as hard as I can against the back wall. That gets everybody's attention, and they behave after that. So I promise not to throw it. I bought it from Molly to play with when she gets tired of eating the chicken nuggets she's working on. So anyway, as I'm repeating, some family connections to New Jersey that he probably didn't seem to be aware of. He never spent a night in New Jersey, dead or alive. And he didn't like New Jersey because New Jersey is the only state in the Union that cast electoral votes against him in both elections in 1860 and 1864. What was odd in 1860 is New Jersey's like I think Nebraska used to be. It wasn't the winner take all the votes. The electoral votes went by congressional districts. And he carried 4 out of 7. But he still lost 3 electoral votes in New Jersey in 1860. In 1864, when President Lincoln was running against General McClellan, only 3 states in the Union voted against him: Delaware, Kentucky, New Jersey. You see the pattern, they're border states. But New Jersey tended to be conservative and tended to be democratic. So he doesn't like New Jersey because it never voted. It didn't, or never voted. It's the only state to vote against it in both elections. There are 2 jokes that New Jersey used to figure in from President Lincoln. One was that there were a couple congressmen from North Jersey visiting the White House to plead for some case or other. They were, how shall I put this, heavyset guys. And so President Lincoln says, New Jersey is a small state. With these 2 big congressmen here in Washington, the state would probably be off kilter. Okay. The other one I like is one of my more favorite ones, maybe my top 5. One stormy night in December, a boat was wrecked off the coast of Jersey. Everyone on board went down with the boat except one poor fellow. This one survivor grabbed a piece of floating jetsam and was washed toward the shore, where a large number of laborers were out there with ropes trying to pull him in. The Jerseyman shouted out, they shouted out to him, you are saved, come get us. And he said, stop, where am I? And they told him, you're off to New Jersey. And he said, okay, never mind. And he kept drifting down towards Maryland. Now, the joke seems to be a dig at New Jersey, but it's even that a drowning man would not be saved here. I've done more research into this. There's a guy named Newell, who was a former New Jersey governor, that had started the New Jersey Life-Saving Service, and Lincoln didn't like him. So there's a double level to this. It's like when I teach Latin for a living. When we're looking at a simile in poetry, there's an obvious level that nobody wants to be saved in New Jersey. There's a deeper level, it's a dig at a specific guy. So those are his 2 New Jersey jokes. Now, to talk more about him and his sense of humor, I want to do a little bit of background first. Lincoln is known for being a humorist, as I said, not so much as a writer. And I got most of this information from a book called Abe Lincoln Laughing. I haven't looked at and would be need to work on for other lectures would be either Ben Franklin, who in Poor Richard's Almanac had a good sense of humor, or the best one's probably Mark Twain. But I like to keep historical and at least have some connection here with New Jersey. I read over 400 of his jokes, and I'll talk about how they got collected. He used them for a variety of purposes. He told jokes when he was young because they came to him naturally. When he was a lawyer, on the circuit out in Illinois. They were part of his tool of trade. He would use them in the trials to try and win over the jury by telling jokes plainly, just to get their attention or favor, or by trying to make a point from what he was working with. I also think that at night, after the trial was over, or when he was doing the circuit waiting for the next town or the next trial, they'd sit around the bar at night and exchange jokes. And you have to appreciate how he would have to leave Mary Todd back in Springfield and travel the circuit, and sometimes he would share a bed with the opposite lawyer, because that's what they did in those days. Seems strange, but that's how they did in old hotels. So he was a traveling entertainment show. In politics, he would use his jokes for ridicule and satire, and we'll be citing about those, especially when he's talking about his generals. Early in his presidency, he would use joking as a roundabout way to stall the topic or detract people's attention. And it was a good joke. You can kind of just drop the topic and move on to something else. And later in his presidency, he used it to show his feelings. And as you know, he did get depressed some, as he had a right to be. His own son died, one of his sons died while he was in the White House. Robert Todd, his eldest son, was serving in the Army, and he was nervous for him, and he had to send thousands of soldiers to their deaths. But he felt strongly that the Union needed to be won. I give lectures. I'm the president consultant for the New Jersey Flag Collection down at Trenton. That he never acknowledged the South had the right to secede from the Union in the first place. The flags that the Union troops carried into battle during the Civil War still had 13 stars or 13 stripes on them. Half of those stripes are for Southern states, and they had 33 stars on them. Many of those were the Southern states, because Lincoln's position was the South never had the right to secede in the first place, and they were fighting to keep the Union together. Slavery became a later issue, but that will be the topic for another lecture. But he did use jokes to save himself from depression. One of the Union officers wrote, Lincoln did not tell a story merely for the sake of the story, but it always had a moral or some part of fact in it. I don't know that I would agree with that. As I said, I would call him a humorist, which is a term I think you would understand, and Mark Twain certainly would. For example, if he saw a black dog and that reminded him of a humorous story, he would tell the story. If it had a relevant point, great. If not, it's still a good story. So that's what the background here is, and we'll look. Okay, first I want to talk about how they were collected. He used these stories a lot when he was on the circuit as the lawyer and in his campaigning for the presidency in 1860. The Democrats mocked him. They made fun of him because of his jokes. And in 1863, published a book called Old Abe's Joker to make fun of him. The Republicans thought that they were part of his humble origins, and they published a counterbook in 1864, Old Abe's Jokes, to promote him. By 1864, he was being blamed for tons of bad jokes, but a lot of the jokes he had were ones that he had collected over the ages, and he just modernized them. But it was part of the homespun image that he wanted to promote in 1860, the election. He wanted to be seen as a frontiersman and a rail splitter. He was a rich lawyer, okay? He was using PR, and the jokes were part of that image. One study says that about 60% of his jokes are recycled, and he was actually seen when he's reading the paper or talking to somebody. If he heard a good joke, he'd write it on a piece of paper and put it in his hat and save it either in his mind or in a booklet until he had a good time to use them. But he does like to just tell stories, and he obviously had a bright intellect which could remember them or use them at the appropriate places. A lot of stories appeared after he was killed, and is the image of him being shot on a Good Friday and dying in Easter season as a savior of the nation made him become almost godlike. But there were still apocryphal stories that came together. One of these is during the debates, or supposedly, we can't prove this was actually said, during one of the debates with Stephen Douglas in 1858, accused Lincoln of being having been a bartender once. And Lincoln replied, yes, I was once on that side of the counter, and Douglas was always on the other side, implying that I was serving, he was the drunkard, not me. He's also great at facial expressions. He had a rather unique appearance to him, and you've heard the story on how when he got elected, he had no beard, and some girl wrote to him and said, you would look older and more distinguished if you grew a beard, and he did, and he had that the rest of his life. Okay. Now, to get down to the different jokes, which I will have grouped together, some of his earliest jokes were sexually oriented. I don't want to share them with this crowd, even though I don't really see anybody underage here, but some of them get pretty funny. But this one is the story of Lincoln and the prostitute. Now, I like this one. It was told by his law partner, Herndon, out in Springfield. And I used that, share a personal story. I was giving a lecture and a talk in my chapel at school one day, and I talked about ancient theories of biography, that the Romans had no trouble telling something that wasn't totally true, but representation of the person, like George Washington chopping down the cherry tree. That probably never happened. It's said because to show how honest he was. The story of George Washington throwing $1 across the Rappahannock River. Okay, Bob Feller, or some famous baseball player, tried to throw a silver dollar across the river. It's not possible. It's to show how strong he was. Well, this one Herndon told about him and the prostitute. And I told this in my school chapel, and the chaplain, who was a woman at the time, a Catholic woman, got kind of annoyed with me. Now, she does speak to me now, but anyway, this is a good story. And it's more about Lincoln than by him, but it's typical of the time. Herndon says there was a new red-headed prostitute in town. Lincoln was feeling lonely one night and decided to go check her out. So he went to the establishment and conversed with her and found out how much she charged. And the bill would be $5. Lincoln said he can't do business because he only had $1. Okay? But she did the deed and let him pay $1, and because she felt sorry for him. Herndon says this epitomizes what Lincoln was all about. He accomplished what he set out to do, and he got it done less than the estimated. This one Lincoln did tell about Ethan Allen, the Revolutionary War hero. Ethan Allen was said to have visited England after the Revolution. He found out that the English liked to make fun of us Americans in not funny ways, including putting a picture of George Washington in the outhouse. Allen used the outhouse and came back, and they asked him, was he offended by having a picture of George Washington in the outhouse? Okay, and his response was, there is nothing that will make an Englishman go to the bathroom as quickly as the sight of General Washington. And Lincoln liked that story. When he was a captain in the Black Hawk War in 1840, he did have some limited military experience. He took his company on a drill, and they were marching across a field and reached a fence. And Lincoln recalled, I could not for the life of me, said he, remember the proper order for getting my company through and over the fence. So what I said was, the company is dismissed for 2 minutes when it will fall in again on the other side of the fence. You get there as you can, and then we'll form up again. Okay, he had no problem denigrating himself. And we'll see that some more when we look at some of his jokes about his looks. Okay, another story. One night, Abe came in wet and cold to a crossroad tavern in Indiana and found the fire was blockaded with Indiana people. Abe wanted the landlord, or he wanted to get near the fire. So Abe told the landlord to take out to his horse a barrel of catfish. The landlord said, he can't eat catfish. And Lincoln said, try him. There's nothing like trying. So everybody that was in front of the fire rushed outside to see if the horse would eat the catfish. And they came back and said, the horse won't eat the catfish. Lincoln, sitting warmly in front of the fire, said, I know, you bring me the fish. So he could use humor to get what he wanted. During the Republican convention in 1860, the hotel where Lincoln was staying had a loud and annoying gong that was used to announce dinner. One night it was missing. Lincoln was sitting at his chair at the dinner table, looking amused, silly, and a little bit guilty. His friend Judge Davis figured out the situation and told him to put the bong back. Lincoln did so and then bounded up the stairs 2 at a time. He had a great practical joke on everybody. He really enjoyed bowling. I love to see Lincoln with a beer in his hand bowling. I can just imagine him having a good time. His favorite sport, however, was wrestling. If you ever saw the movie with, I think Fonda played Lincoln on Young Lincoln, he was a good wrestler when he was young because he was big and lanky. So he enjoyed sports. Now, as I mentioned, some of his jokes were about his looks. And here are some of them I'll share with you. In the days when I used to be on the circuit as a lawyer in Illinois, I was once accosted in the cars by a stranger who said, "Excuse me, sir, but I have an article in my possession which I think belongs to you." And Lincoln said, "How is that?" "I don't know you." And the stranger took out a jackknife from his pocket. "This knife," said he, "was placed in my hand some years ago, with the injunction that I was to keep it until I found a man that was uglier than me. I have carried it from that time to this. Allow me, sir, to present it to you since you are fairly winning it." Okay. So he would accept that he had a unique look to him. I have often wondered what his father looked like, and he had a sister, Sarah. Now, unfortunately, his sister died of milk poisoning, meaning you used milk that was from cows that drank some foul weed that they weren't supposed to eat. Anyway, his sister died real young. I often wonder what she looked like. Anyway, next. As he was leaving a speech in 1860 in Indiana, he was asked by an old man, "So you're Abe Lincoln?" "That's my name," said Lincoln. "They say you're a self-made man," said the old guy. "Well, yes," said Mr. Lincoln, "that is me. What there is of me is self-made." "Well," said the old guy, "all I've got to say is, that was a damn bad job." And that's a joke Lincoln would say on himself. So I guess I don't think he thought little of himself for that, but maybe it's a point to others. If I can honestly say what I am, why can't you honestly say what you are? That might be the logic behind it. In 1863, he told his friends that he had a dream. He was in a party of plain-looking people, and it became known he was there. They began to comment on his appearance. One of them said, "He is a very common-looking man, Mr. Lincoln." And Lincoln replied, "Common-looking people are the best in the world. That is the reason God made so many of them." Okay. At the same convention, he said he told someone he felt like an ugly man riding through, or he told the story of an ugly man riding through the wood who met a woman also on horseback who stopped and said, "Well, for land's sake, you are the homeliest man I ever saw." And the man who was supposed to be Lincoln said, "Yes, madam, I can't help it." "No, I suppose not," she observed, "but you might at least have stayed at home." So I wouldn't have to look at you. Okay. Can't imagine George Washington telling stories like that. Okay. Quite often he would do natural or off-the-cuff jokes. Once he was on the balcony with Mrs. Lincoln, who would accompany him, but although she didn't when he went to give the Gettysburg Address. At the end of his short speech, because he was often asked for them, he said, "Here I am, and here also is Mrs. Lincoln. That's the long and the short of it." Oh. Because she was yay tall, and he was yay tall. Yeah. Okay. He was in Springfield once, this is a story one of his grocers told. It concerned the occasion of the birth of one of his children. The man who was familiar with the conditions of the story relates that when he met Mr. Lincoln, who was on his way to church, they talked together. Mr. Lincoln said, "Well, this affair is all over. Both the mother and the child that was just born to you are doing well. I may consider myself fortunate in this matter. Only think of it. If the child had been born with a long leg like mine and a short one like Mary's, it sure would have been an awful thing." So he was happy his friend's child was born normal. When asked if he was going to see a lecture by James Thackeray, a popular but wordy author of the day, and they used to give lectures even in Mark Twain's day. He would do the lecture circuit because they didn't have cable TV then. He responded that, yeah, he would go and see the lecture unless there's a good minstrel show in town. Okay, so he probably wasn't going to go with that. Okay, this is one from during the war. When one general captured a town in North Carolina, there was a great curiosity to see where the Navy was going to go next. And Lincoln was asked, "Will you keep the destination entirely secret?" And the president said, "Well, I'll tell you where they're going." And he assumed a great air of mystery and said, "After they capture that town in North Carolina, they are going to go out to sea." And that's all the information he would give. Okay, this one is one of my top 2 favorite Lincoln jokes. After the Battle of Antietam, he went to a hospital to greet everybody, and he was known when he went to hospitals to spend hours there shaking the hand of every man in the hospital. Now, Antietam's important because I've also worked some researching Clara Barton, who ran a schoolhouse in East Windsor, New Jersey, near where I live, for a while, and then went down to Bordentown and ran a school there until it got so successful they in essence fired her to put a man in charge. So she went down to Washington and became a clerk. She was still looking for her way in life and ended up becoming a nurse. And the first big battle that she was nursing at was the Battle of Antietam in September of 1862. So it seems that this nurse was working on a wounded soldier, and to all her inquiries as to the location of the wound, she could only get one reply. When she asked, "My good fellow, where were you hit?" And the wounded soldier said, "At Antietam." "But where did the bullet strike you?" said the nurse. "At Antietam," he replied. Becoming discouraged, she asked President Lincoln to find out. So Lincoln went over and talked to the soldier. He came back and took the nurse's, both her hands in his, and said in his most impressive style, "My dear girl, the bullet that wounded him would not have wounded you." So that was off the cuff. Okay, now here's my favorite one. They just happened to fall here together. I did have to cut a few out for time purposes. A newspaperman who happened to be around saw Lincoln, or heard Lincoln, telling one of his little stories, and we'll talk about more of that in a moment, to Secretary William Seward. Now, what's neat, and one of the more influential books I've had the opportunity to read is the Lincoln biography. I was going to say, it's not Band of Brothers. Oh, geez. Team of Rivals. Team of Rivals. That when Lincoln got elected, he did not, like the current president, put all his buddies into office. I was going to say whether qualified or not, but I promise not to get political here. But Lincoln put into office his rivals, Secretary Stanton and William Seward from New York, and the Blairs from Missouri. And they were his rivals, but they were also able men. And he respected that, and he made it work, which is one of the great aspects of being in that crisis. So he was out with Mr. Seward one day, and they passed a sign bearing the label that it was the store owned by T.R. Strong. And Lincoln said, his countenance lightening up with a special smile, "Tea are strong, but coffee are stronger." Seward smiled knowingly and said nothing. my favorite one, and I can't figure out where I heard it before, is that he heard somebody talking some geometry for some reason about the area of a circle who's good in math, pi r squared. And President Lincoln promptly said, pi r not square, pi r round. Okay, just this quick wit, no point to any of that, but it's a neat story. On another occasion, this is another Seward joke, he was riding with Secretary Seward, and the driver lost control of the horses and began swearing loudly. Lincoln promptly said, "My friend, you must be Episcopalian." And the driver said, "No, I'm Methodist," with a puzzled look. Lincoln said then with a laugh, "Oh, excuse me, I thought you must be an Episcopalian because you swear just like Secretary Seward, and he's an Episcopalian." On meeting Harriet Beecher Stowe, you might have heard this one before, the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin, in 1862, he said, "So this is the little lady who started this big war."
Yeah.
That's one of his more famous ones. Okay, some of his tales were folksy. He did grow up on a farm, although it's kind of questioned which one it was in Kentucky. And when they when they rebuilt the little log cabin, have anybody been to that in Hutchinsville, Kentucky? They got timbers from an old house nearby. It turned out not to be the right one. And when they built it, it was too big to put into the monumental building they had built, so they had to take some pieces off it. So it's the idea that counts. And the family actually did own some additional land in that area, but he did grow up with a farmer background. Uncle Abe had a friend named Hay, and tells the story. The fact was, when he talked to Hay, the incident reminded him of an affair with a guy named Jim Hawks from Illinois, who sold a dog to a hunting neighbor as a first-rate coon dog. A few days later, the man brought him back saying he wasn't worth anything for coons. Well, he said, "I tried him for everything else, and he wouldn't hunt them, so I reckon he must have been a coon dog." Okay. Lincoln used to tell the story of a school teacher who said to his pupils one day, "If each child will bring an egg to school tomorrow, I will show you how Christopher Columbus made the egg stand on end." I don't know what that's all about. "Those who cannot bring an egg, please bring a piece of ham." I guess with the price of eggs now, maybe the ham's cheaper. One of Lincoln's illustrations on a crisis he was working through, he told of a man who was in hopes of putting the head on a barrel. Now, barrels aren't important to us because we use container ships and whatnot, but in those days they shipped everything in barrels. But he had trouble getting the head of the barrel to stay put, because you have to strap it in just right. At length he got the bright idea of putting his little boy inside the barrel to hold the lid up. This he did, and the lid stayed. But it never occurred to him that when the job was done, how was he going to get his kid out of the barrel? Lincoln said, "This is a fair example of how some people do their business. They work for the solution, but don't worry about the outcome." Okay, now I mentioned before that he liked to say, "This reminds me of a little story." Okay. A gentleman was telling at the White House how his friend had been driven away from New Orleans because he was a Yankee, and how when he was gone, he asked to see the order that caused him to be deported. They called on him that the government had made up their minds, and so they issued no writs, they simply had to go. "Well," said Lincoln, "that reminds me of," and I love the movie Lincoln, if you've seen it. We think of Lincoln as being perfect and a gentleman and whatever. I guess dirty politics is the term to use. He wanted to get the 13th Amendments passed to eliminate slavery. And once you got slavery eliminated, or he did that actually with the Emancipation Proclamation, but that was only effective for the states then in revolt. The next extension, and he saw it coming, was you had to guarantee their civil rights, which is our 14th Amendment. And when that didn't fully work, you had to get the 15th Amendment through. You had to guarantee the right to vote. And those all were logical, one after the other. And when he was trying to get the votes for this to happen, which is what the theme of the movie Lincoln was, he was given, in essence, bribes right and left, putting pressure on people. He was a real politician, but he sacrificed some of those ideals in order to get the bigger ideal in place. Just as we had to go through the war, and those thousands of men died on both sides in order to keep the Union together. That sad way to do it. War is a terrible thing. But he had that higher vision. So Lincoln tells the story. This reminds me of the hotel keeper down in St. Louis who boasted that there was never a death in his hotel. Whenever a guest was dying, he had them carried outside in their bed so they would die in the street. Okay. Old Abe, once reminded of the enormous cost of the war, remarked, "Yes, that reminds me of a wooden-legged amateur who happened to be in Virginia on a skirmishing party." So some soldiers actually, instead of going into the Veteran Reserve Corps, which they were permitted to do, and then they would guard the McDonald's and the banks and the important establishments back in the war area, they'd go back into service. So this guy had a wooden leg and was back in the Army. A shell crashed nearby and hit his artificial limb, and crashed it to bits. The soldier grinned and bore it like a man. The neighbor, who was also wounded, was much worse off. Being rebuked by the soldier that was wounded, the guy with the wooden leg said, "Oh yes, it's well enough. Your leg didn't cost you anything. It will heal up. But my wooden leg cost me $200 to replace." Okay. Back in Ohio, a woman went to join her husband just before Election Day. He was running for, I think it was governor. And she told her friends that she didn't expect to return until she did so as the wife of the governor, the guy running for election. It was a woman there as governor. Lincoln got this story going. That reminds me of a present little affair we had out in Illinois. A gentleman was nominated to be supervisor. On leaving home on the morning of the election, he said, "Wife, tonight you shall sleep with the supervisor of this town." The election passed, and the confident gentleman was defeated. The wife heard the news about the defeated spouse, and when he returned home, she was packing up her dress to leave. And the husband said, "Where are you going?" And she said, "Going? Well, you told me this morning that I should tonight sleep with the new supervisor. Since you lost, I'm going down the street." Okay, so he doesn't mind telling a slightly dirty joke. Okay, now we'll lapse now more into the wartime ones. Okay, let me know if Molly is bothering you at all. I do have another treatment. Okay. Today at the executive mansion, he said, someone came out and said that intemperance is good because intemperance, too much drinking, is the cause of our defeats. And Lincoln replied, "I don't think so, since the rebels clearly drink more than we do, and they're losing all the time." Mr. Lincoln had a very effective way sometimes of dealing with the many men who asked him questions. Somebody once asked him how many men the rebels had in the field. He replied very seriously, 1,200,000, which is clearly way too high.
Yeah.
The asker he shouted back, "My God," said he. And Lincoln replied, "Yes, 1,200,000, no doubt of it, because that's every time our generals get defeated, they always say the enemy had 3 times as many men as we do, and I know how many men we have." One day, as the president and a friend were sitting at the House of Representatives, the last session closed, and the members filed out in a body, and Lincoln looked at him and said, "That reminds me of a little incident when I was quite a boy. I was in Alton on the Mississippi for a day and strolled about the town. I saw a large stone building with big walls, and I was looking at it when the doorway opened and a large body of men came out. 'What do you call that?' I asked a bystander. 'That,' said he, 'is the state prison, and those guys are all thieves going home.'" Tells you a little bit of what he thought about Congress. Okay, now here's the ones on his generals. Which way did Molly go? Up there? Okay. Lincoln particularly liked the joke at the expense of the dignity of some high civil or military official. One day, not long before his second inauguration, he asked if anyone had heard about Stanton's meeting a picket in South Carolina, and was told this story, that General Foster, who was at Port Royal in South Carolina, escorted the Secretary of War up the river. Reaching the outer lines of the river, a picket yelled back, "Who have you got on board?" The severe answer was, "The Secretary of War and General Foster." Immediately, the picket shouted back, "We've got lots of major generals up here. Why don't you just take it back and bring us some hardtack?" Okay, hardtack was the crackers that the soldiers ate. They had plenty of generals. They needed some more food. When informed that General Stoughton had been captured by the rebels in Fairfax, Virginia in the spring of '63, this was embarrassing. Fairfax is not too far outside of Washington. And one of his generals got captured by Confederate General Mosby. The president is reported to have said he did not mind the loss of a brigadier general as much as he did the loss of his horse. He said, "I can make a much better brigadier general in a few minutes, but the horse cost us $125. Okay, lots of generals. This one you may have heard. I remember hearing it even in high school before I got into this. Lincoln sent General Joe Hooker to take over the army. Hooker rushed headlong into action, sending his dispatches labeled "Headquarters in the Saddle." Usually it would say "Headquarters, Falmouth, Virginia," or "Vienna, Virginia." And Hooker, who actually lost the one big battle he got to command at Chancellorsville, was writing to Lincoln that his office was headquarters in the saddle. Lincoln promptly grinned and said, "The trouble with Hooker is that he's got his headquarters where his hindquarters ought to be." Yeah, that's yours. I'm not going to take it away from you. Okay, continuing on. Tonight, the president said he was much relieved at hearing from General Foster that there was firing in the town of Knoxville, Tennessee. He said anything from news about him is cheering, like Sally Carter said when she heard one of her children crying and said, "Oh, there goes one of my babies crying. At least he's not dead." For a while during the war, General Fremont was without a command. One day in discussing Fremont's case with a friend, President Lincoln said he did not know where to put him. But that reminded him of the old man who advised his son to take a wife. To which the son replied, "All right, whose wife shall I take?" A committee, just previous to the fall of Vicksburg, was anxious for the morale of the army and took it upon themselves to visit the president and urged the removal of General Grant. Ooh. "What for? Why for?" said Uncle Abe. "Well," the busybody said, "he drinks too much whiskey." Said Uncle Abe. "Can you inform me, gentlemen, where General Grant gets his whiskey?" And the committee, they said they didn't know, because Lincoln said, with a merry twinkle in his eye, "If I can find out, I will send a barrel to every general I have." Or the alternate version of that is, "I'd like General Grant, he fights." As opposed to General McClellan, who had issues with, General McClellan was commander of the Union armies, actually 2 stints in 1861 and 62. And he got the Union Army, big Union Army, down to the edge of Richmond in 62. And I think might have taken it if Lincoln had let him stay there, except Lincoln ended up recalling him because of some other military things going on. It took 2 more years for the Union Army under Grant to get down to exactly the same spot. And I don't want to think of how many casualties that had been there. Lincoln either listened too much to his advisors or wasn't the best military tactician. But his main strength, as with General Washington, is he wouldn't quit. Okay. One of the important aspects here of the Battle of Monmouth was that Washington usually lost battles when he was the attacker. He only won 4 battles during the war: the Siege of Boston, the Siege at Yorktown, and what I call the sneak attacks at Princeton and Trenton. If he had lost this Battle of Monmouth, he might not have been kept in command because there were others, including his second command, Charles Lee, who wanted his job. And he might not have won the revolution, and he wouldn't have become the first president, and this is all involved in the Washington talks that I give. Because he wouldn't give up. Same thing with Lincoln. Same thing with Lincoln. Okay, one of the most famous Lincoln sayings that you may have heard is when he said, "You can fool some of the people all of the time, and all of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all of the people all of the time." Not going to apply this to present politics. You may have heard the saying before, but you may not have heard where it came from. And this, he was speaking of Senator Stephen Douglas in 1858 during the debates. Now, what's interesting with Stephen Douglas, being a leading Democrat of the day, author, I think, of the Kansas-Nebraska Compromise, he was a leading politician and a good guy. A lot of time, good guys, I think mostly of Adlai Stevenson, just run at the wrong time and don't get themselves elected. But Douglas was a rival for the hand of Mary Todd. And Mary Todd picked Abraham Lincoln over Stephen Douglas. I don't know if Lincoln actually regretted that later or not. We won't get into that. But there are some interesting biographies done of Mary Todd, who I think they had 4 sons. One died young, one died in Washington, and one died shortly after the war. The one that survived the longest was Robert Todd Lincoln, the one the president liked least. Will eventually become Secretary of War after the Civil War, and that he was urged, the son Robert Todd Lincoln, to run for president. He said he wouldn't do so. I'd just be running on the name. I don't have the experience, which I respect him for. But Mary Todd Lincoln was, I don't want to say high-strung, but dang it, she was there in that box at Ford's Theater when Abraham got shot. And she did get unhinged for a while. And Robert Todd Lincoln had to put her away for a while, which is sad. And that always strikes me as too bad. Lincoln had all kinds of plans to go traveling in Europe and enjoy life. And he was assassinated when he was only, I'll have to do the math, but like 54? Yeah. I'm 76. I've had a good 22 years. And I think, when Lincoln was my age, he was dead 22 years. Yes, the war really aged him, and you can see that in the pictures. I have a book at home showing all those pictures from the beginning of the presidency with no beard up until lean and gant there near the end. And they have one of the in-between pictures is the one that's on the $5 bill. But anyway, with Senator Douglas, he was a rival for Mary Todd's hand. And I guess Lincoln will say he won out on that. But might have to ask what Mary Todd thought of that. Douglas was the main contestant in the 1860 presidential election, and part of what was going on then was both parties splintered. So there were actually 4 parties running for president, and the border states were putting up one candidate, and the Southern Democrats one candidate, and the Northern Democrats one candidate, and this newfound Republican Party, which was mostly the old Whig Party, put in Lincoln. He could not have gotten elected if the parties were all split up like that. But what if Senator Douglas had won the presidency? We don't know what would have happened, but the significant thing is Douglas died 2 years later. And imagine whoever the president was dying 2 years into the Civil War before it was resolved. We're just lucky that Lincoln survived till the very end of the war. And the irony was that he was assassinated, a week after General Lee's army surrendered. Lincoln had actually gone down to Richmond to visit it while it was still smoking after all the fires there. The same thing, what if General Washington had been killed here? And actually over at the Battle of Princeton, he was riding in front of his troops to steady them. And the British were ready to fire a volley at him. And the British commander said, no, don't. This is not honorable. Because the British officers felt a stronger connection with the American officers than with their own troops. Because the officers were the rich people, the leaders, and it was not honorable to shoot the other guy's commander that way. So thank goodness Washington did not die during the war. Thank goodness Lincoln made it through the war. Okay, so I think that's the end of the stories I wanted to tell. That I leave some time open for questions, but again, summation being a teacher. Lincoln had a cool sense of humor. There are books around going back to 1863 of them that interpret them. I didn't bring with me, which was one from 1943 that I just found an old paperback. And I should probably read that through to see if there's new jokes or new interpretations. That some are just there to be drunks, to be jokes on the spot, like the pi r square, no pi r round, and others to explain what's going on, like the guy with the catfish at the bar, that there are ways to get things done, or there are ways that people get things done without thinking that the mechanism of getting it done or the outcome is worse than what you started. I love in that, again, another thing I love about that movie, Lincoln, was when he starts, they're all cabinet members sitting around the table, and Lincoln starts a joke, and everybody's eyes start rolling. And Lincoln gets so involved in telling the joke that sometimes he will deflect you from continuing that topic, or he breaks attention by doing that. But the thought of him when he's reading Harper's Weekly or talking with somebody, scribbling down jokes he heard and putting them in his hat, and then saving them to the right time to use them. Now, what's interesting, though, and it's the first time I've thought of this, and I've given this talk a number of times, his writing, he was a good writer. I mean, the Gettysburg Address is one of the greatest speeches ever written. The monument to the Gettysburg Address there in the National Cemetery of Gettysburg is, as far as I know, the only monument to a speech in the world. It is short, it's been translated into many languages, but it gives the point of the war, his belief in God, his belief in what he was doing. He doesn't use those jokes in his writing. He'll use them one-on-one, he'll use them at parties, he'll use them at home. There's some slight similarity with George Washington, in that Washington was obviously more at home in Mount Vernon with his friends and with Martha. I mean, she had a parrot, that just amazed me, and the parrot would pick up the coolest things. And there's some jokes I told about that. You can tell what sense of humor he had by what he named his dogs. I mean, people say they have dogs in their own image. Or the dog will take on your personality, as you will some of your dog. But he enjoyed his hunting dogs. He had different aphorisms. But one problem that is a difference between the Washington jokes, and some of you heard that talk in February, and the Lincoln jokes now, is that Washington's jokes got cleansed away. A lot of Washington's writings or recollections were edited in his own time to clean them up, to get rid of the dirty jokes, to make them, there was one of his generals named Putney, Washington used to call him Old Put. Somebody thought that was offensive, so they took out Old Put everywhere in his writings when they published him and put General Putney. Okay. But fortunately, some of those have survived, and then they got re-edited after he died. So Washington's memory and Washington's writings have been cleansed in that. Lincoln's haven't. It maybe went the other way, in that a lot of jokes were attributed to him that weren't his. And more than half of the jokes he did tell were just recycled from other people that were around. And when you weigh it out, was his aspect of being a humorist, or I don't want to say jokester, because jokester has an implication of being malevolent. Did it make him more popular or less popular? Well, clearly, even though the Democrats tried to make fun of him by citing his jokes, I think it made him more popular with the people, and perhaps even more popular with stuffed shirts like Stanton and Seward and some of the other people he had to work with. Okay, so I'll leave it at that and throw the floor open for any questions or comments you might have. Thank you for listening. I said it's the first time I've given this in a few years. It is my favorite lecture to give, because some of those jokes are just real good. Some are a little harder to figure out till you get into the background of them. Okay, thank you. I'm glad to talk to you individually. Some of the books I wrote, give a commercial here in the gift shop on the Revolution and on the Civil War. And I said the next lecture will be on Washington as a field commander. Okay, thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.